Hey everybody, welcome. Thank you for joining me. It's evening time here. It's a little bit windy today. The air's kind of moist, a little bit humid, but not foggy. You know, it's funny, or rather, it's interesting to consider how differently each person can be in the world. And similarly, how different people will sort of have sensitivity to different aspects of how we are. They will see us differently. For example, some people see me as filled with wonder and joyful and playful and mischievous, and other people see me as morose, frightened, as sort of at war with myself. I've been reflecting on this the past few days because circumstances have highlighted it. And it's not that one or the other thing is true, it's more that we're each very unique in how we employ our cognitive and relational and emotional faculties in making derivations. This is the important aspect of my concern at the moment. And of course we make derivations for purposes. So often one may have an investment in a particular position or perspective or idea, and this will profoundly influence or orient our evaluative activity. And this is true of knowledge as well as relation, as one can see with the current, if we look in the social sphere, there are many bizarre new Thrisps. And what I mean by a Thrisp is a contagious, competitive concept, and this can be linguistic too. So we might also say a dialectic. I'm not sure I entirely understand what that word means, but these ideas, I'm hoping the wind won't be so bad that maybe I can sort of cover. I don't know if this will work. Could get a little noisy, but maybe the noise will pass as I move to a more protected area. So by a Thrisp I mean something a bit more complex than Richard Dawkins' idea of a meme or a conceptual virus. I don't know why we should really call them viruses, because there seem to be ideas and concepts that are complex enough that we should consider them to be more like organisms, right? Or even conceptual ecologies, or they're not actually ecologies though, they're something that mimics certain functions of ecologies in a way that is almost mechanical. And I find it very strange, the modern situation, because although it's always been true, there have always been these things that I call Thrisps. And I'll just sketch the model very briefly, right? The human cogniscium is a network of minds in a way that's its own dimension. It's its own environment. The mimula connects all of the minds, and these are all the different transports that can be used by Thrisps to propagate, and also in an attempt to dominate aspects of the mimula, right? So the mimula would be like whatever connects, it would be similar to whatever connects to computers in a machine environment. The mimula is the network between all of the minds. And it's very sophisticated. There are profoundly profuse forms of mimula. So one of them is the internet, another one is news, one is mouth-to-mouth communication, another one is books. But perhaps the most important aspect of the mimula is the environment, because changes we make in the environment are communicated not only to other human beings, but to all life on Earth. So there's at the sort of outside, there's the environment, and then as we go in, the mimula becomes more and more mechanical or device-like. And of course, YouTube and video making is part of the mimula. And in fact, this idea of Thrisps and the cogniscium and the mimula is a Thrisp, right? It's a concept. So what we have that I find very worrisome today is a vast new plethora of bizarre Thrisp-like, not Thrisp-like, these bizarre new Thrisps. And some of these have emerged from specific aspects of academia. For example, the dialectics around things like gender politics and culture politics, particularly the idea of cultural appropriation. It's a relatively new Thrisp. And many of these Thrisps are engineered or emerged as a result of engineering-like activity in the dialectic of victim and privilege, right? And so it has become popular now to assert certain kinds of victimhood, and then to at the same time assert blame toward people or cohorts that can be seen as perpetrators. And it's not my intent to object, particularly universally, to such these complex dialectics, though I find many of their origins and purposes quite terrifying. So too their functions. Surely there are situations in which it is clear that a person or cohort inflicted harm on another person or cohort for the sake of some power dynamic or profit, or possibly like psychological, like domination games and things like this. That happens, that's real. One, I think, obvious example is that there's been an invisible pandemic of rape in the United States. And I can't speak about other countries, though it's very obvious that in many other countries it's far worse than here. But there's been an invisible pandemic of rape here for, well, who knows? Probably since the beginning of the colonization process. And whether or not, I can't speak to the situation in indigenous peoples before the onset of colonization. And in fact, speaking with any degree of authority about history is much more difficult than we pretend, because we simply were not there, right? We have no observers on the ground in those times to communicate to us whatever it was that may or may not have been going on. And without that, it's very difficult to understand what we should validate as factual. Yeah. But in any case, there have been and continue to be horrific instances of oppression, violation, murder, rape, tyranny. And in no way do I intend to or desire to minimize those realities. But the Thrisps that have arisen in the wake of our... we have all these weird new little terms like woke, right? I certainly don't trust whatever that term might mean. And each of us also is unique in that we grew up in a specific temporal, linguistic, and sociocultural layered array of contexts. And so, for example, my father, who was born either in the late 40s or early 50s, grew up and received his formative imprinting in a very different world from the one that I experienced. And so there are things we can see eye to eye on, but there are also things that our imprinting produces conflict around. I feel very suspicious, however, of the actual purposive and functional results of many of the modern Thrisps that surround the privileged victim dialectic and other political dialectics. Certainly, it is crucially important, for example, to protect children, but it's to protect children from very specific kinds of harm, right? From very specific kinds of abuse, but then on the other hand, from all abuse. And in a sense, from all the harm we can possibly protect them from. However, it's bizarre to think that it's only our children that are worthy of protection. Because certainly, in every human being, a child yet lives. Yeah? And so there's no human being that isn't a child. Why don't we protect everyone? You know? I can understand that we prioritize the protection of children. That's interesting. Huh. And that makes sense to me. I prioritize the protection of my own child. And yet, it's possible to co-opt that desire and produce various kinds of tyrannical results, right? So this is the weird problem that faces us. Well, it faces those of us who wish to face it today. We now live in a situation where, and I think it's always been this way, it's just that the degree and the scope of the problem has become vastly inflated over, say, the past 20 or 30 years, and particularly in the past 10. We face a problem where the imperative to accomplish something that seems morally and ethically crucial, valid, good, can be weaponized in ways that produce terrifying results, that can produce forms of fascism or tyranny. So that, for example, the the purpose of protect the children can be used and politically modulated, and this is almost like the production of a gain of function, virus in a way. We want there are certain factions of people who want to engineer Thrisps and release them into the socio-cultural environment, into the cogniscium, for purposes that are not actually the on-label purpose. So, for example, there's recently been an announcement that Apple Computer will begin scanning the photographs on all Apple Computer phones for images of child abuse. On the surface, this appears to be a noble purpose, a noble idea, a noble agenda. How could it be wrong for us to try to find people who are abusing children or exchanging photographs of children being abused? How could that be wrong, right? That just seems good. However, it's a very slippery slope that collapses. And of course, this is another part of the problem. We've seen an ongoing attack on not just our privacy, but the possibility of privacy. And it's sort of has maybe three, this hydra has maybe three primary heads. One of them is advertising. One of them is what we refer to as law enforcement. And the other one is perhaps something resembling, hi! Something.
I heard a dog behind you, no?
I didn't see one. I didn't hear one.
Someone growling.
I mean, I could hear the dog barking at the house, but that's about it. Nice to see you.
Likewise, take care.
You too. There are various other political purposes. And, for example, under the guise of counterterrorism, the privacy of all Americans was severely compromised and remains that way, and has been continually chipped away at with various technologies that gather recordings of all of our phone calls, all of our texts, and analyze them. There's essentially a city, I think it's in Salt Lake City, that was built by Homeland Security for this purpose. And that's a horrific and devastating destruction of the possibility of our privacy. And the problem is that as social animals, we respond in ways both visible and invisible to observation. Positive surveillance is a crucial part of being human and having emotions, our emotional development, our intellectual development, our behavioral development. With positive observation, that nourishes many aspects of our humanity. And that's part of what organizations like Facebook and YouTube and Google and Twitter and Instagram and Pinterest and all this hitchhike on this, right? But they hitchhike on it for nefarious purposes that are devastating, in fact, when we examine their repercussions in the cogniscium and in individual human lives and minds. They are not only devastating, but either we have privacy and freedom from living in a fucking panopticon where we're being constantly observed by authorities with nefarious intentions, or we have privacy. And it's possible to have the opposite of a panopticon, or at least a malevolent panopticon, where we invent technologies for positive mutual surveillance, not really surveillance, observation, that anonymize data and produce staggeringly beautiful results that maintain our psychological health, our cultural health, our social health, our physical and behavioral health, and contribute otherwise inaccessible assets to our lives. And this is where I think we must, this is the direction in which I feel I want modern humans to travel. I want us to go in this direction toward producing technologies that, while protecting the privacy of individuals and groups, also magnify the benefits of the information that our interactions with machines and cameras and so on produces. So that rather than being threats to our lives and minds, we have allies. So I'm quite concerned about anything that universally compromises our privacy for some stated goal that appears noble on the surface, but has malevolent outcomes or sequelae, or can be abused. I think the decision by Apple to include this technology in future OS releases is catastrophically negligent and wrong-minded. Not because I don't want to protect children. Of course I want to protect children. But part of protecting children involves the preservation of privacy. Additionally, the mandate of this technology is truly bizarre because it only detects photos that have already been collected in a database, right? Now, it's essentially a universal wiretap. But rather than listening to phone calls, at this point, they're just going to listen to photographs. And the whole process is automated. In this direction lies great peril for all of us. Because there's an endless array of possible offenses that our lives can be scanned for evidence of. Some time ago, there was a film called Minority Report, which I'm pretty sure was based on a Philip K. Dick novel. Very prophetic mind, in which a pre-crime bureau prosecuted crimes prior to their commission. Right? And the thing that the humans seem very ignorant about is that the purposes for which we institute technologies change what it means to be human. So not only can they fail to inhibit the kinds of tyranny and crime that we want to put a stop to, I'm going to talk about that more in a moment, they can produce those crimes, right? Humans have a very strange response to being, again, observed, or even to being told that something is not to be done. Some people have a problem called ODD, which is oppositional defiance disorder. One of my close friends has this problem. If I say to him, you do not want to do this, do not do this, there's an urge that immediately rises in him to do that exact thing. And it's very compelling. we can easily find a situation where the implementation of prohibitive information technologies produces the opposite of the result that's desired or superficially intended. So what then do we do? I think we're 2 days past the quarter of this moon cycle. First quarter. So how do we solve problems? If we don't, institute dangerous technologies like these? Well, I kind of want to ask, when did a technology solve a problem in our social sphere, in the social sphere of humans? And, there might be some reasonable answers, but I'm going to suggest that mostly there's a lot of trouble produced by our technologies, and particularly the onset of computation, smartphones, the internet, email, all of these things. But what we do is we form something actually resembling together intimately in our lives. We form deep bonds around mutual purposes that we believe in, and we enact social culture contexts and situations. We embody them, right, rather than handing them off to machines, so that it becomes immediately apparent if anybody's abusing anyone else, and this is dealt with not by punishment, because punishment seems to produce more of the problem, but in a way that actually affects the origin of the problem and transforms it and reveals to all of those involved where this comes from and what it is an expression of, and gives us the diagnostic intelligence necessary to transform our social and relational contexts in such ways that these terrible wrongdoings become first less and less common, and then eventually sort of go extinct. And that's an achievable goal, but not with machines. So I am very concerned about many of these Thrisp-like concepts in the socio-political and news environment today that celebrate victimhood in various ways and train us to look at situations or problems from a single perspective that is pronounced as authoritative. There's no way to become intelligent that way. That is the death of the possibility of insight, awareness, and intelligence. We need to be able to bring a broad array of perspectives to any problem we want to look at or address. We need to be able to entertain many perspectives, more than 7, on any issue, if we want to understand and have awareness and affect it in a way that is healthy and intelligent and effective. So, as it is now getting dark, I'll begin to wind down on that topic, which actually wasn't really even on my mind. I've discussed Thrisps, the mimula, and the cogniscium in many of my other videos and recordings, if that topic interests you. And I'm extremely concerned about the onset of what we presently refer to as political correctness. I think it's a dangerous mess, a sort of breeder reactor for Thrisps that weaponize ideas that seem superficially noble and are likely to produce results in many cases that are catastrophic or devastating or ugly. That's not the only thing going on there. That's the aspect that I'm very concerned about. particularly anything that is designed or in its inaction puts an end to conversation and dialogue, or says who can speak and who cannot, who will be allowed to speak and who will not. That's a terrifying cascade that leads to, in my experience and understanding, very devastating results socially, intellectually, cognitively, linguistically. So I'm quite concerned about these things. But it's funny because when I first began this video, I had a simple thought in my mind, which is that the struggle and crisis of the past few years has brought to life in my mind how incredibly precious every living thing is, every living person, every moment of life, every day, every meal, every footstep, every plant, every animal, every insect. And just how profound the experience of deep gratitude in each of the days of our lives, how transformative that can be, how healing, how nourishing, how reassuring, how beautiful. This was actually my thought and concern when I began the video this evening. It's funny what branch I ended up on. Unexpected. I'm a little bit under the weather, as one might say, today. Except that it's not really the weather that I'm under, it's time. I'm under the time. The temporality of my life has been disrupted. In a way that's producing damage in my intelligence and memory, in my mind. And it's very challenging. Nonetheless, in the crisis of the past few years, I've become not just intimately aware of the power of slowing down and the preciousness of any moment of joy or beauty or replenishment or rejuvenation or renewal, but I've become to embody them, this feeling of incredible gratitude and humility and awe and wonder and joy. And I hope that for each of you for who this may be healing or nourishing, you may experience something similar in your own time and place and way of life. And you may also embody the practice of awareness of the preciousness of our lives and world, our relationships, our food, our water, the living places, the living planet, her origins and companions. Wouldn't it be wonderful if something like that became contagious? Thank you for joining me. I hope we shall continue to learn and explore our human experience, minds, and awareness together again very soon. Bye-bye for now, my friends. Much love to you all. May your lives be blessed and protected.